Joining me today. You are in the right place if you want to hear more about how to stop self criticism and how to quit being so hard on yourself. That's exactly what we are going to be talking about today. And I want to assure you, you are in good hands. I'm Melody Wilding. I'm a professor of human behavior and executive coach, and I'm the author of Trust Yourself, Stop Overthinking, and Channel Your Emotions for Success at Work. I am also the creator of a program called Resilient, which is a first of its kind, comprehensive 3-month group coaching program to help sensitive high achievers, people I call sensitive strivers, regain their confidence, master their emotions, and reach their full potential at work. So if you are joining, say hello in the chat. I see we have a few of you here live. Syed, good to see you. Great. Let me know where you're watching from today. Excellent. Great to have you all here. Kristen, good to see you. Excellent. I want to ask you a question. I want you to imagine how much further you could go in your career without imposter syndrome, perfectionism, burnout, self-doubt, without those things holding you back. And imagine how much more fulfilled, productive, effective you could be if you got out of your own way. Resilient is designed to help you do just that because we have combined curriculum, weekly coaching with me and my team, a high level community to deliver you proven strategies to help you trust yourself and to use your sensitivity to fuel your success instead of self sabotage. And all of that is so that you can go from helpless to empowered, from insecure to confident and more assertive, from overthinking everything to proactive and focused, and from emotionally spiraling to being more balanced and grounded. And today is a really exciting day. It's a great time here because Resilient actually starts next week. We start on September 21st. And this is the last round of 2023. So if you want all of the details, if you want to confirm your spot, there is a QR code here on the screen. You can open up your phone, go to the camera app, and that will bring up the link directly to the page. You can also head to the URL here on the screen, melodywilding.com/resilient. And on that page, if you would like to book a free, no pressure, no sales call with me to talk about your situation, your goals, see if the program is a fit, you can do that there as well. So again, QR code is here on the screen. The URL is also on the screen here, melodywilding.com/resilient. All right, let me say hello to some of you in the chat. Ron, great to have you here. Amanda, excellent. Latrice, great. So say hello if you're just joining. This topic, stopping self-criticism, not being so hard on yourself, was directly inspired by the work I've been doing for over 11 years now. In my coaching practice, there's a common thread in almost every conversation I've had, and that is intense self-criticism. And that's why I felt compelled. I felt it was so important to talk about this topic today. Because out of all of the challenges my clients face, being excessively hard on themselves usually tops the list. It's not just the external pressures they face, the workloads, the fast-paced changes. It's not that drains their energy the most. It's often the internal battle they're fighting against their own relentless inner critic. So if you can relate to that, give me a +1 in the chat. Great. Let's see. Let me say hello to some more of you. Ali, great to have you. Tamika, Kimberly, Francisca, great to have you here. Excellent. It doesn't matter whether I am coaching or working with a CEO of a successful startup, someone who is going up the ranks in the corporate world, someone who is just starting out in their career. Their inner narrative is shockingly similar. They are telling themselves things like, I could have done more. maybe I'm not cut out for this job after all. Everyone seems to have it all together except for me. So I want to ask you, do you ever finish a presentation and instead of celebrating, you replay the one slide you stumbled on? Have you ever wrapped up a workday feeling like you haven't done enough, even though you have been working all day nonstop? Do you ever hesitate to share your ideas in meetings because you fear that it's not going to be good enough or that you might sound silly? There are so many ways self criticism shows up, from very subtle to the very obvious and in our face. So, I want to give you a few of the most common ways I see it show up. And as I'm going along today, I want to add, please share what is resonating with you in the chat. If you hear something that stands out to you as particularly valuable, insightful, useful, let me know. Share it. Please help your neighbors out. If you hear something that is important, please share it in the chat so everyone else can be following along as well. I always love these to be a conversation with you. So I want to go through some of the most common ways self-criticism shows up at work. And let me know in the chat which one of these you relate to the most. So first we have perfectionism, that feeling that nothing you ever do is good enough, and more importantly, obsessing over your mistakes. So I like to say that perfectionism is really about over-indexing on your weaknesses and under-indexing on your strengths. And sometimes you may fixate on mistakes even when they have no significant or meaningful consequences. So that's the first way self-criticism shows up, perfectionism. Number two is a reluctance to take risk. You may avoid stepping out of your comfort zone, trying something new, because you don't want to be judged. You don't want to fail. You don't want to be criticized by others. So you keep yourself small, even if that criticism is perceived. It's many times in our own head. All right, so perfectionism, reluctance to take risks. The third way that self-criticism tends to show up is overthinking. This is a huge one. You may ruminate on past mistakes. You constantly replay them in your mind. You may agonize over future decisions because you fear making the wrong choice. Fourth is procrastination. So you can probably see how fear of not being good enough, not producing the best work, might then cause you to delay starting or finishing tasks or making decisions. So many times, procrastination is really not about a lack of time management skills, it's a lack of emotional management skills. Let me say that again. Many times, procrastination is not a lack of time management skills, it's a lack of emotional management skills. Fifth way, self-criticism tends to show up at work. Avoidance of feedback. So just like you may avoid other risks, take going for a promotion, speaking up in a meeting, you may dread performance reviews or shy away from asking for feedback because you don't want to be on the receiving end of negative comments. They may confirm the worst fears you have about yourself, and that feels too uncomfortable to bear, even if that feedback is meant to help you grow. All right, sixth way that self-criticism tends to show up, our good friend, imposter syndrome. That despite your accomplishments or qualifications, you feel like a fraud and you feel like at any moment people are going to find out that you're actually not qualified for your role and tell you to pack up your stuff and get out of there. Seventh and final way, or I should say the most common ways that I see self-criticism show up, excessive comparison. That is our last one, excessive comparison. You constantly measure your achievements, your capabilities, your skills against colleagues you may work with, people on the internet, and you feel envious or you get down on yourself if someone appears to be doing better. So let me know in the chat. I'm going to repeat these one more time. I want you to share, if you are open to it, which one of these you relate to the most in terms of how self-criticism shows up for you at work. We have perfectionism, reluctance to take risks, overthinking, procrastination, avoiding feedback, imposter syndrome, and excessive comparison. So which of these tends to show up for you the most? Latrice is saying this is good. Great. Latrice, I'm glad you're enjoying it so far. And hello from Bangalore. Great to have you here. Excellent. Now, and thank you for those of you who are typing in, sharing what resonates with you the most. I'm seeing perfectionism, procrastination. The worst part about constant self-criticism is that it's really mentally draining. It's like having this demanding, difficult, toxic boss in your head that never takes a day off. So just imagine if you in real life, like in your actual life, you had a manager who, no matter how hard you worked, how much you achieved, was always pointing out what you could have done better, what you should have done more of, what you missed, or how something someone else did was better. Over time, you would come to really dislike that person. Over time, that would become really exhausting. Your enthusiasm and your joy for work would probably disappear, even if you were genuinely passionate about your job. And the same is true. This is exactly what we do for ourselves. The same is true when that manager is in our heads, and that is our internal dialogue. Okay, so I see a lot of you saying overthinking, imposter syndrome. Yes, overthinking, a lot of that. Reluctance to take risks. Yes, many of you saying guilty of all of the above. So I wanted to share these signs first because, as always, self-awareness is the first step to change. And recognizing these signs is the first step to addressing and managing them, always. But for many high achievers or top performers, self-criticism isn't just a habit. It's almost an ingrained part of our identities. That constant internal voice you may consider to be something that has pushed you to excel, to overcome obstacles, to set the bar higher and higher for yourself. Maybe you think, I would love to hear from you, if you think it's something that has helped you succeed over time. And this happens very often where the internal critic becomes a familiar part of ourselves, where many times we don't even notice it. We've just internalized it because many of us believe that it is the driving force that gets us to the next level. And I get this. I get this, that there is this idea that being harder on yourself motivates you to achieve more, to be better, to not settle for mediocrity. But it's important to realize there's a paradox here. While that critic might propel you forward sometimes, it's often the very thing, more often than not, that holds you back. Because, perhaps you've thought that self-criticism is what keeps you sharp. It's what keeps you on your toes, ahead of the pack, always growing and changing. And a lot of my clients keep hoping that if they're just tough enough on themselves, that is what's going to compel them to perform. But the research shows us otherwise. Research shows that self-criticism is a very poor strategy for motivation. And that, especially like most things, when it's used excessively, when we overuse it, it is consistently associated with lower motivation, worse self-control, greater procrastination. And that's because self-criticism shifts your brain into a fear state. It shifts your brain into a state of threat, inhibition, which prevents you from thinking clearly, concentrating, from taking action to reach your goals. So that's an important reframe, that self-criticism is actually a poor motivational strategy. Now, when I do keynotes, when I do trainings, coaching within companies, I'm often asked for people, why are some people more self-critical than others? And as with most things, there's a little bit of nature and nurture here. So nature being biology and your wiring, and nurture being your conditioning, your environment. The environment, as I was saying, the environment in which we're raised can play a significant role in how we see ourselves, how we come to form our own self-perception. If you're someone that grew up in a house where there was a high emphasis on perfection, where the people around you were critical of themselves or you or others, or there were unrealistic expectations, you may have internalized those standards. You carry them with you into adulthood. And on the other hand, if there is a lack of validation, acknowledgement, appreciation when you're younger, that can also lead to a persistent sense that nothing you ever do is good enough, or that keeps you craving other people's approval and validation. And it's also no secret that we live in a society that celebrates grit, hustle, perfection, being the best. And often that sets us up for feeling less than. If you open social media, it's very easy to all of a sudden feel like you're down a rabbit hole of not being good enough. But continually berating yourself isn't resilience. It is not the same as pushing for excellence. It is self destruction in slow motion. All right. I really want you to take that home because I think there's a big misconception about us. Okay. Let's see. I'm just checking in with your comments here. Yeah, so Ali was saying, I used to be a perfectionist and it helped me achieve a lot, but you're right, it's not sustainable. And now I know flow state is more empowering, more productive, and more fun. I love that, Ali. Great. All right, we talked about the nurture piece. Let's talk about the nature piece because some of us are more predisposed to self criticism because of the way we're wired, because of our nervous system and our biology. Many of you have probably heard me talk about the concept of being a sensitive striver. If you are new to that, it is a term I coined to refer to professionals, leaders who are both highly sensitive and highly ambitious. Sensitive strivers are perceptive, they're empathetic, they're conscientious, they think before they act, they're very deliberate, they pick up on subtleties in their environment and nuances. And all of that is combined with this strong drive to succeed and achieve. So if that is you, if you relate to being a sensitive striver, type me in the chat if this is sounding like you. Great. Yeah. Excellent. So while all of these aspects can be strengths, right, as a sensitive striver, we also tend to be much, much harder on ourselves. So why is that? Well, one reason is because sensitive strivers tend to process information more deeply. So that means we're thinking, we're reflecting more before we arrive at conclusions, before we take action or make decisions. And that can mean that we ruminate over mistakes, feedback, or perceived slights longer than most people. Being highly sensitive also means you have more intense emotional reactions. So, a minor mistake, a slight piece of criticism, even the possibility of a setback can lead to a more amplified response for us, which can manifest as criticism. So you may more easily also pick up on other people's emotions. And that can be very overwhelming, especially if you sense disappointment, disapproval from other people, and you internalize other people's emotions as a reflection of your own shortcomings. Okay. Yeah. All right. I'm just checking in with the comments. Okay. Perfect. Sensitive strivers also tend to have a strong sense of responsibility, whether that's for the team dynamics, project's outcome or results, and other people's feelings. So we also tend to blame ourselves if things don't go perfectly, even if many of the factors were outside of our control. Now, I'm sharing all of this with you because I want to reassure you that if you have ever felt weighed down by that voice inside of you that's pointing out every misstep, or you found yourself shrugging off praise because you think you just got lucky, you are far, far, far from alone. And I hope even being here and seeing some of the comments here is allowing you to realize that you are not broken, you are not weak, you have just not been shown or not given the tools to manage your thoughts, your emotions, your sensitivity as a strength, to use it for yourself instead of against yourself. So, this is the work we do inside of my 3-month coaching program, Resilient. And as I mentioned at the top, if you're just joining now, I want to share that Resilient is open for enrollment. As of today, right now, we start in just about 1 week. So, time is running out to grab your spot in the final round of this year. The QR code is here on the screen if you're interested in learning more. You can also head to melodywilding.com/resilient. You can book a call with me there to discuss whether the program is right for you as well. And inside Resilient, we give you a comprehensive roadmap, a ton of very, very practical tools for overcoming self-doubt, self-criticism. And today, I hope this conversation is already giving you some important ahas, light bulb moments, helping you connect things in a way you might not have before. So, on top of that, I also want to give you some useful tips. I want you to feel like you walk away from today with things you can try. And I want to set you on that path today so you can begin feeling more confident, more secure at work. Again, as I'm going along, please share what is resonating with you in the chat. Okay, great. All right, let's dive into our first tip for stopping self-criticism, which is to create psychological distance. Someone help me out by typing that in the chat. Our first tip is to create psychological distance. Psychological distance means that we put a gap or a space between ourselves and some object, an event, a thought. So this can be putting space in terms of time. So we might think about the future or the past rather than the present moment. It might include putting space between something, considering something that happened far away versus close by. It might include social distancing when we think about another person's perspective instead of our own, or hypotheticals, imagining a possibility rather than our current reality. So, you know how sometimes you feel very close, you feel very fused with a thought or emotion, like it's right there in your face, it's all encompassing. Well, psychological distance is like taking a few steps back from that emotion. So, if you can imagine holding a painting very close to your face, you can't really see the full picture when it's right up against your face. But if you hold it back at arm's length, you start to get a clearer view. That's the idea here, that at its core, psychological distancing functions as a tool to shift our perspective. It's a perspective taking tool. Our brains, especially as sensitive people, are naturally wired for zoomed in thinking. As sensitive people, we are more highly on guard for threats, for rejection, for anything that could signal a threat to our self worth. And that narrow focus it's like amplification for negative thoughts. It's like taking a microscope or a magnifying glass and amplifying those negativities 10, 20, 100x. Makes them seem more significant than they actually might be. So psychological distancing is about zooming out when we use a different part of our brains that allows us to see the bigger picture. And that change in perspective can make some of those uncomfortable or unhelpful thoughts seem less daunting and seem more manageable. And thank you for all of you that are helping me out by typing notes in the chat. Excellent. So in the context, we're talking about self-criticism. That might mean instead of just going down that spiral of negative self-talk, it's almost like you allow yourself to float above it. You see it for what it truly is, just one aspect of your larger self. It's just one voice in your head. And doing that is shown, taking psychological distancing, especially when it comes to negative self-talk, has been shown to reduce the discomfort, the stress of negative thinking, and the level of believability of your negative thoughts. And it promotes greater flexibility where you can more readily manage your emotions. You're more aware, open, adaptive to whatever is coming your way. So, speaking of this, one of my favorite and what I think is the most fun way to create psychological distance from self criticism is by personifying it. So, for example, you might give that negative voice in your head a silly name. You might call it a character from a movie. So, type in the chat, what would your negative voice be called if you had to give it a lighthearted name? Go ahead and type that in the chat. I always love to see the creative things people come up with. It's so much fun. Yes. Excellent. I like to call mine Bozo because it is quite a nuisance at times. You might call yours the little monster, gremlin. What would yours be called? Type it in the chat. By giving your inner critic a name, you are essentially humanizing it. And by doing that, you're reducing how abstract and how nebulous it feels. So think about it. It's much easier to address or negotiate with something or someone when you have a specific name to call it, when it feels like a defined entity rather than this big, scary, overwhelming thing. So the process of naming gives you a sense of control and agency to more directly address this negative voice head on. Right. I want to hear some of your names. Janice, Margarita said the not enough. Lucy from Peanuts, Larry or Barry, Nellie, Patricia, Donkey from Pooh Bear. Great. Bruno, since we don't talk about Bruno no more. Excellent. I love it. So fun. Doing this also, and I hope many of you are just in this quick little exercise right here, it creates awareness because often we're not even aware of that constant stream of self critical thoughts running through our minds. It just has become second nature to us. By naming your inner critic, you become more attuned to when it's showing up. And each time it speaks up, you can acknowledge it. You can say, "Oh, that's just Bruno talking," or Berta. Never fails that there is always a Karen. That's just Karen talking. And that awareness again is always the first step in being able to change. The act of naming, especially if you give it something that's lighthearted, humorous, it reduces the stress that comes along with this. It is a really humor is a really powerful diffusing tool. It decreases that tension and the seriousness, the heaviness that often accompanies being self critical. Because instead of just spiraling into negativity, you can laugh at yourself and you can say, "There goes my gremlin again." And plus, when you name your inner critic, you create a dichotomy between your true self and your critical voice. This is something we talk a lot about in Resilient. Again, if you would like more information about the program, QR code is here on the screen. But in Resilient, we talk a lot about trying to separate between what is the voice of fear and self criticism and what is the voice of trusting myself, your intuition, your gut sense that says when something is right for you. And that separation allows you to realize that you are not your thoughts. Just because you are having negative or unhelpful thoughts doesn't mean that they're true or that you need to act on it. All right, that was our first tip, create psychological distance. Number 2, and someone help me out by typing this in. Our second tip is to avoid generalization. Avoid generalization. Now, one of my clients, I'll call him Ben, he is a research and development director at a pharma company. And he came to one of our coaching sessions recently feeling very, very distraught. And he told me, "There was a situation that happened at work today. I cannot get this out of my head." And it turned out that Ben had spent hours preparing for an all hands meeting with his colleagues and his superiors across the world. He reviewed the agenda, he drafted his talking points, he arrived early and tested all his software. And then things started to go off the rails. Have you ever been there where, despite all of your best efforts, Ben in particular struggled to be heard over some of his more extroverted, dominant colleagues? He couldn't get a word in edgewise when he tried to speak. And when he did, he felt very flustered, off his game. He was flubbing all his words. And afterwards, he couldn't let this go. He was so preoccupied and beating himself up. He was asking, why hadn't I been more assertive? Why did I have to over explain instead of just sticking to my talking points? Have you ever been there? I know I have. When I pressed Ben for details, though, about this all hands meeting, it became very clear that no one noticed he was flustered. No one had any idea this was going on for him. In fact, ironically, the COO later told Ben that she thought his comments were one of the only moments of clarity in the conversation. And that is a direct quote. This was a huge shock to Ben since it was completely opposite from his own self-perception. And this is a clear example of what's called the spotlight effect. Just think of like you have a spotlight on all of your behavior. Well, guess what? Other people have a spotlight on their behavior. So this is the tendency to misjudge or overestimate how much other people are paying attention to what you do. So to combat the spotlight effect, I want you to think about considering your performance on aggregate versus zeroing in on one singular negative event and using that to make this global judgment about yourself. So think about your performance at work like a bell curve. If you remember that from, what would that be? Calculus, I guess? I forget what type of math that was. Most days you will perform within the body of the bell. You'll perform average or slightly higher than average most days. Some days are going to be in the tail end. They're going to be below average, and that's normal. Keep an eye on the bigger picture. This is important because when we generalize, we're essentially painting an entire canvas with one single brushstroke. And not only does this simplify, distorts our understanding of ourselves, but it also reinforces our negative beliefs and perceptions. So for instance, Ben, who I was talking about just a minute ago, who messed up that one presentation, was beginning to generalize that he was always terrible at public speaking, right? He took this one situation and made it mean a global negative judgment about him. And the risk of that was that he would internalize that belief and he would let it shape his future decisions. Because he thought, I'm terrible at public speaking, he wouldn't volunteer his ideas. He wouldn't raise his hand to lead parts of meetings. You might be hearing in what I'm saying that a hallmark of generalization is black and white or all or nothing thinking. All or nothing extreme thinking. And it's that tendency to see something as either a complete success or a total failure. And that binary view doesn't allow for the nuances and the gray areas of life, which are just how life works. So recognizing when you're stuck in this type of all or nothing thinking is very crucial. Instead of categorizing or labeling something as good or bad, I want you to start identifying the middle ground. So Ben, who I was mentioning earlier, recognized that yes, that all hands meeting wasn't his best showing, but he was only stopping himself by taking this one unfavorable meeting and generalizing it to a pattern. So specifically, we worked on him getting rid of some of that all or nothing language. I always mess up. I'll never get my voice heard. This happens every time. And in the same way, you can combat generalizations by also questioning your own all or nothing thinking. So when you have, or when you say something to yourself like, I always mess up, Look for evidence that actually confirms that. How many times have you succeeded versus failing? And when you start collecting the evidence, you will probably find that reality is actually much more balanced than you initially thought. The word yet is also a very, very positive or powerful tool here. Instead of saying, I can't do this, you might say, I haven't mastered this yet. Just add yet onto the end of it. And this shifts a statement from a definitive all or nothing to emphasizing a growth mindset, emphasizing that it is a learning journey. All right, so that is our second tip, avoid generalization. Let's move on to our third and final tip, and someone help me out by typing this in the chat. Flip the what if narrative. Flip the what if narrative. The human mind is wired to make meaning out of situations and to answer questions. And from an evolutionary perspective, our brains are wired for a negativity bias, that we pay attention more to threats and negative things happening because it's a protective mechanism. Being on alert for threats kept our ancestors safe. And this is actually a core feature of high sensitivity, that it was helpful to have someone in the group who was scanning for danger in the environment and who was more cautious before running into situations. But in today's world, this means that we may be more predisposed to focus on downfalls rather than possibilities. And for sensitive strivers, this can be even more pronounced because of the way we're wired. When we continually ask ourselves negative what if questions, our brain tries to search for answers. And all of that can lead to the spiral of worst case scenarios, overthinking the situation. But by flipping our what ifs, we guide our brain to more constructive questions. So instead of, what if the senior leadership hates my presentation? Just flip that. What if the senior leadership loves my presentation? What if my idea isn't stupid? What if it's the breakthrough that this project needs to move forward? Positive inquiry can generate optimism. It opens our minds to different solutions. And positive what ifs aren't just about asking questions, but it's also about visualizing the answers. Imagining in your head the applause or the successful presentation you're going to give. Visualizing these scenarios creates a blueprint in your mind. It makes it easier for you to navigate challenges more confidently. And a practical way to make this a habit is to maintain a journal. Whenever a negative what if question pops up in your head, write it down and then craft the positive counterpart. And over time, this exercise will become more natural. It will become more second nature and become your default thinking pattern. I want to be clear, though, that flipping the what if narrative doesn't mean ignoring potential challenges. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is you need to achieve balance. For every concern, think of the flip side, the possible positive outcome. And that ensures you are thinking about challenges while also having a more hopeful outlook. All right. I see a few of you are just joining. Chris was saying journaling works. Excellent. Let me know, type in the chat here, what else is resonating with you out of what I shared today. We talked about 3 tips for stopping self-criticism. Let's see here. We talked about tip number 1, creating psychological distance. Tip number 2, avoid generalization. And tip number 3, we just talked about our final tip, flip the what if narrative. So out of everything we talked about today, what resonates with you the most? Go ahead, type in the chat. If you resonate with being a sensitive striver, your desire to be the best is an asset when it is managed correctly. So once you tamp down this tendency to be hard on yourself, you will be able to more fully leverage your sensitivity, your conscientiousness, your ability to see nuance and problem solve, and your ambition for the gifts that they are. So, to everyone who considers themselves a sensitive striver who is tuning in right now, this is the tricky and beautiful irony we've unpacked in this conversation today, that the very depth of feeling and commitment we have that sometimes leads you to be overcritical of yourself can also be one of your greatest assets. That your sensitivity combined with your inherent inner drive is a rare gift, something about only 20% of the population has. And like any gift, it needs the right care, it needs the right attention and nurturing. Now, the tricky bit is that our default settings, our old patterns, ways of thinking can sometimes overshadow our ability to take advantage of this gift because we are by nature our own worst critics. And sometimes not recognizing our achievements, and instead we focus on our own perceived shortcomings. But I want you to remember that your desire to be the best is a very, very commendable trait. I don't want you to lose that. But I do want you to realize it becomes an asset only when you learn how to manage it correctly. And that is the secret, that once you master the ability to temper that self-criticism, to quell your self-doubts, you will not only find peace, but you will also unleash your full potential. I've seen it time and time and time again. And by doing so, you'll be in a better position to celebrate your sensitivity and your ambition as the gifts they are, and not as burdens that they can sometimes feel like. I want to be clear about something else, that this journey to overcoming self-criticism is not a sprint. It is not a one and done. It is a marathon. I wish, trust me, I wish it was as easy as flipping a switch and suddenly you are just free from all of these harsh inner voices. I wish that were the case. But it is about consistent practice, repeated effort. You have to realize you are changing your brain here, and that takes time. And it takes the right kind of support. It takes having a skilled coach. Just like an athlete has a coach to consistently perform at their best, as a sensitive striver, you can also benefit from well-trained guidance so you know how to steer your innate qualities in the right direction. And that is exactly what we do inside of Resilient. So as I mentioned at the top of our time today, Resilient starts next week and enrollment is open right now. This is the final round of 2023. So if you are interested, the QR code is here on the screen. The link to learn more is melodywilding.com/resilient. If you want to emerge 90 days from now more confident, more secure in your own skin, more assertive, with greater inner peace and presence, then check out that QR code or the link. You can also book a time to chat with me on the page there. Or you can DM me here and I'm happy to set up something. Now, this program is designed keeping in mind the unique challenges and strengths you face as a sensitive striver. Resilient is not just another cookie cutter coaching program. It is a supportive community. It is a space where you can safely learn, grow, evolve alongside other sensitive strivers, guided by me, a trained professional who understands your journey and who has also navigated a similar path myself. It's about building that inner strength, mastering your mind, celebrating who you are so that self-criticism doesn't stand in the way of your success. For over 4 years now, I have been running this program and I have seen it absolutely transform the lives of our alumni, from helping them get skip level promotions, 6-figure bonuses. We've even had people run for and win public office, which is really cool. What's even more incredible and meaningful is their inner transformations. How they and the people around them notice how much happier, lighter, more optimistic they are. So, again, Resilient enrollment is open now. We start next week, so there is not much time left to get your spot. And this is the final round of the year. So, as we wrap up today, I want you to remember that with all your sensitivity and your ambition, they are extraordinary if you know how to channel them correctly. So, I hope to work together. I would love to support you to ensure that for you, the voice inside of your head recognizes that too. So again, click the QR code here on the screen or head to melodywilding.com/resilient. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining today. Yes, there will be a recording afterwards. You can come back to this page that you are viewing this on, and you'll find the replay later. So, thank you so much for joining. I look forward to hopefully seeing many of you inside Resilience, and I will talk to you very soon. I'll be back tomorrow with another live, and I hope to see you then. All right, take care, everybody.